Listen, the US just made it official and legal to make America poorer because from now until after the next elections, they can print as much money as they want. The last time they did that, inflation went up 9%. With the BRICS nations working together to create a new reserve currency, the US government just added fuel to the fire. The threat to the US dollar is getting stronger. It's time to protect yourself, your family, and your future. Invest in gold with Noble Gold Investments. Gold is the one asset that is proven to withstand recession, inflation, and just about all economic threats. Noble Gold Investments is here to help you if you want to invest in gold. You will also get a 24-karat, 1/4 ounce gold standard coin for free. Go to noblegoldinvestments.com now. noblegoldinvestments.com, the gold company I trust. Hello and welcome, everybody, to a very, very special live stream. Inspired Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers, John Nolan here. I've been excited for this. I am excited, and the day has come. We're doing something different today, and I don't want to go, long-winded here. I want to bring him on right away. The man who over a year ago, in the spring of 2022, I've told the story before. I was reading, and it was very coincidentally because I usually don't, do this every day. But I was reading an article on my friend's Jan van Helsing's platform, and it was just something that caught me. Right? These articles when you read them and it goes, and you're just in it. And I remember thinking, I got to talk to this guy. We got to bring him on. This man is onto something. And he was breaking the story on the Guardians of the Looking Glass. And that's where the Frank Jacob inspired saga began over a year ago. My God, so much has happened. It feels like a decade. Mr. Frank Jacob, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to see you, John. Good to be here.
Man,
yeah, that's true. It was a crazy year, wasn't it?
What do you mean? I feel like we packed a decade into a year or 2 decades. It was. Can you believe it's only been a little over a year?
I know. It just seems like light years have been traveled in that last year. And of course, lots of air miles too, somehow, as it turned out. So it was really like a roller coaster, quite an intense time, I must say. And it's not seeming to be letting up anytime soon by the looks of it either.
Oh, no. We're only, when you think we can't accelerate anymore, we're accelerating. But also, we've really gotten to know each other over this year. And it's like with so many other people in the recent past that I've been connected, it's like, okay, it feels like a higher power is bringing us all together at the right time. So for us, we're thankful to call you a friend, Frank. And today we wanted to do something special. We wanted to put our wonderful Inspired Tribe, your fans and the viewers and the people who are so often doing the legwork and the research, we wanted to put their questions at the center of this conversation. So we're going to do a Q&A in a little bit here. But Frank, I first want to catch up a little bit with you because as I said in the trailer here, you've been traveling, you've been doing speaking tours, and every time that I message you, you're somewhere else and you're sending me pictures of sold out rooms and sold out audiences. What's been going on in your life? It seems like forever since we last spoke. It might have been 6-7 weeks ago, but what's been going on in Frank Jacob's life?
Well, it depends how far back we go now. I think the last time we did a show, it was just before I left for the United States. And the target or the goal of that trip was to go to the Sedona conference that actually you were originally intending to go to, but for some health reasons, I guess you had to back out or whatever it was, your back or something, which I know a little bit about that can happen.
An injury, but it's all good now. I did the right thing, so it worked out.
Good to hear. And we missed you. We really missed you. And what happened is that trip, for me, it was a kind of event that sort of brought things full circle because I was there were some people in the that were there presenting, and one of them was a musician called John Domas, and he was a flute player, and he was talking about how long he'd been in Sedona when he'd first gotten to Sedona. I was listening to him talk, and I'm like, now wait a minute. When I do the math on that, actually, I beat him to Sedona by like 2 or 3 years, right? So I brought that up, and it just dawned on me then that here I was, like actually coming full circle. I think roughly 25 years had passed, since I was there, and I was on stage presenting stuff that was like critically important. And I remember when I was living in Sedona, I was already, of course, in the mindset of trying to wake people up and figuring out ways that you could do this. Of course, we didn't have the internet back then like we do now. So you could just kind of think about, should we do a radio show, or should we do some like underground, like, a shortwave radio show or something, because all the airwaves are being blocked as well. So here it was. That trip kind of brought that full circle. And I think something really special in that trip that happened, because I was there with Tanya Maidenford. As you know, I'm working with her in film a lot, and we've done a lot of great films and over the years, consciousness-oriented films. And she'd been on a project for an extended amount of time, and we finally reunited for that trip. And so we did a lot of appearances in Sedona, and it was really kind of out of this world in a lot of ways, to kind of see that Sedona scene, how it had grown and evolved, and how more sophisticated it had gotten since we were there. It was really grassrootsy. During that time, we were actually invited to go to Hopi land.
Wow.
So that was extremely special, because we had this, private group of really intense spiritual friends and people, this very small circle. And we were taken by a shaman to go see Prophecy Stone and some of the other, amazing areas, just to see them for ourselves, to feel them. And, we couldn't, he told us the whole story of the prophecy of Prophecy Stone. But he wouldn't let us, of course, record. We couldn't film, actually that's heavily verboten. Even the fact that I was there carrying a camera was kind of interesting, because it was like, oh, someone's on the road, hide the camera, right? We weren't filming, but just to have a camera in your hand around your neck was already, for him, a problem. So we learned a lot about the Hopi from him, and we learned about the Hopi prophecy that was on that Prophecy Stone. And for me, that was another amazing synchronicity, because what brought you and I together was the idea of the Looking Glass Guardians. What they were talking about with the Looking Glass was about timelines. And if you look at that depiction on the back of the Prophecy Stone, and I've been talking about these two major timelines, these two consensus timelines, and there it was on the rock, the two timelines were drawn, it's like clear as day, right? And what they symbolized was, the top line was those who are above and who feel that they're above the rest of the world, right? Symbolizing really the elites, symbolizing the snobby attitude. And below them was the real way, the natural path. And we've been talking about these two timelines, the natural, organic, biological timeline, and the synthetic, transhumanist timeline. And it was just interesting to see how, all these events that had taken place in history had been depicted there for hundreds of years, even to the point where there's a point where the two timelines, the two lines on the stone, they have a bridge to each other. And it's like at the end of the lines, like it's the last kind of moment where the people on the top have a chance to redeem and join the people on the natural way. And I guess you could say the other way around would account too, that people that have kind of forsaken the natural way for all the difficulties and all the pain you have to go through to become an awakened person could, jump up to the other line. But the problem with the other top line was, at that point, it starts on a roller coaster, which symbolizes that, every direction they turn, it's wrong, and they have to turn around and go the other direction. They get to the end of that road and they turn around and go the other direction. So you have this zigzag line. Whereas on the other line, you have this symbol of how the creator being, who they originally met when they entered on this diagram on the stone, is, again, he's holding this, the tree of life, as you could say, and he's got this symbol of the balanced way. And there he is again at the very end of the lower timeline, representing the natural timeline, holding that. And that's kind of where we are right now.
No shit.
Yeah. I mean, so it was just very, very powerful. And then after that, we were taken to a valley where there are there are lots of hieroglyphs that have been painted on the walls, and I mean, and just what you see on those is, it like, it doesn't take a big imagination to kind of, sort of see that these circles and these things and objects in the sky, they could represent what's going on in the world right now, especially what's going on right now with respect to things in the news these days. And then after that happened, we got on a plane and we headed back to Europe. And I didn't have, 5 seconds to kind of land. And I'd already been booked on a speaking tour through northern Germany this time. So I had enough time to just kind of catch my breath, unpack my suitcases and repack them, and head on this northern Germany speaking tour. And that was like, I didn't know how that was going to go, but it was amazing because every room that had been organized was packed. It was like, no matter where I went, it was like there was a buzz. And it was very, very powerful because it was a totally different kind of German up there from the Germans that I was used to in southern Germany, which are Bavarians. And it's almost like the Bavarians are more, laid back, and they're
more like Austrians. Let's admit it. I mean, they're more
like the Austrians. They've been overshadowed, and I guess they've been impregnated by the Austrian Gemütlichkeit, as they say, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And whereas the Northerns are really critical, they're hyper. They're living and it's colder. They're more like the Nordics, like the
structured, very structured,
very structured, very strict, and they're very skeptical. So they were listening and it was amazing because I'd be talking and I would crack these. I have this sort of subtle, sarcastic humor built into some of my lines, right? And whereas the Bavarians would just crack into a belly laugh, the Northern Germans would be like silent.
So the same anecdotes, the same jokes wouldn't work on the Northerners.
They didn't work, and sometimes I had to kind of like say, okay, you can laugh here, you can clap here, and then they'd like, oh yeah, okay, then they'd loosen up because it really was funny. It was like, so after a while, it was just getting used to that. But I realized that people there were just as sincere and just as hungry for information, and a lot of people there said, my God, thankfully, finally, someone comes around to our part and levels with us, because my presentations aren't necessarily all these like woo-woo, new agey love and fest kind of stuff. We're all going to be, everything's going to be perfect, just pray. And we're all, I'm like showing them hardcore slides of like bioweapons and their bloodstreams and, saying, come on, people, like, it's nice. Okay. Be positive, but look, open your eyes and look what's around. And if no one's going to show you, at least I'm going to show you. Think of me, whatever you want. So that was kind of like a good way to sum up that whole experience. And then, coming back, it was just realizing, my God, there was like, you're on a wire, on a wave. You're just so in this zone. And when I was on the train back, it was a 7-8 hour drive and on the train, and I was just like, just wiped. And I realized, okay, that was when the balloon deflated.
I mean, you're an artist. I'm an artist. It's kind of like when you go on tour. And, the first few nights, you kind of get into it, you're not fully there yet, but then you fall into it. And there's a rhythm to it. There's the whole little universe that is created around that energy. And once you're in it, it's also hard to get out of it again. And you're kind of like, okay, where's the next? And then you go, no. Okay, we're taking it a little easier, but you haven't really taken it easier, Frank, because you sent me a screenshot. You sent me a screenshot of a movie that you're in the final stages of editing. I know you can't say anything about the movie yet. This is something that's upcoming, but I just saw the huge amount of tracks, and I know what that means as a music guy. But so you've been doing that, but you also, and this is the first announcement of this finally, because you've been talking about this to us. We're so excited. Tell us what is coming up. Something that I believe a lot of people have been waiting for.
Well, it's something that I started before my trip to the US, and I was hoping to finish it before then, but you know how it is, just never works out quite that way. And I was chomping at the bit to get this information out, because this topic is something which is, I think, a highlight or a special focus on what's really going on right now. And it has to do with, and Tanya came up with this name for it. She said it's the inner looking glass, which I think is perfect because it's talking about.
I love it. I love the name.
And it's talking about, biological functions that we have centering around our pineal gland. And there's been a lot of information about the pineal gland that's been put out there, but this is sort of really ties it into this idea of the personal looking glass, because that's kind of what we each need. Because a lot of people were asking, like, well, what can we do, and what can we see, how, what direction should we move in, and things like that. Well, this webinar will answer a lot of those questions about, in terms of, first of all, understanding that little known, amazing looking glass within our heads better, and tracing it right back to kind of its origin. It goes right back to the beginnings of civilization itself, and up to this time, to these, you could call them the end days, which a lot of people are calling them, because it's like we don't have much further to go before there's that dividing line between, hey, what's the choice then going to be all about? Did you guys sell your souls for the transhumanist line, or are we gonna find our way and lead to the other way that the Hopis, like, for example, we're talking about, this natural way? And I think, and from what I understand, and my colleague Dieter Breurs, he recently wrote a book about it. And as you know, I don't know if you know, but we also are good friends with another amazing author who's written something called The Keys of Enoch, J.J. Hertog. And they have these things called the keys, him and Desiree, and they bring these keys out. And he's like a modern day prophet, this guy. And he got this download in the 80s, and he's only, they're still working that material through, because it was so revolutionary and so potent. Some of the stuff is only really now clear. And one of the things that's talked about in the keys is also the pineal gland. So we're going to tie in some information that nobody has heard before, that really makes it like, just unbelievable, totally another kind of level information. So I've been editing. We've been working on that new film, actually, for the last 2 months, really, whenever there was a window, because I had an obligation to do it. And, if I say I'm going to do something and I don't do it, it bothers me, but also other people, they get kind of pissed if you don't follow through on what you say. So I had to do it. But at the same time, the looking glass, the inner looking glass webinar has been I've been assembling it in phases. And so now I want to announce it to you, because, hey, I'm back on with you, and it's great, because our audience really grew up with us talking about this information. So what better place than to say it? So for all the people who are listening, I'm going to offer them like half off if they want to pre-register, because it's not completely done yet. It's going to be released on the 14th of July. So until the end of this month, I'm going to just put it out there for you guys who want to, save some money and invest in the actual process itself, that you can. So that's the announcement.
That's fantastic, Frank. I just wanted to say something, and we're going to give people, we're sharing the link here. It's in the description, so people can go and pre-order, which it's also important. And I say this, what we do is a full-time job. And what people see that's on camera is just the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the work happens in the unseen, and there's travel, there's research, there are interviews, there are expenses. So when you put a webinar like this together, you are bringing absolute extreme value to the people. So in that, I asked people to support your work by purchasing the webinar, and then get so much more value than you could ever even dream about for that kind of money. But you gave us a coupon code, Inspired to Know, and we shared it. We shared the link. You go there until July 1st. When you pre-order, you save 50%, half off. Come on. I mean, give someone the gift and purchase another package for someone else. I think that's an amazing thing to do. And we're going to share the link here again. But Frank, what I wanted to say to that, the Inner Looking Glass, I think it's a brilliant title. Please tell Tanya that it's absolutely brilliantly put together. And it's always the women.
Yeah.
Right. It's always the women. I'm not even arguing with that anymore. Right. Because my wife is also brilliant, and she comes up with these things probably like Tanya. But the inner looking glass, it's kind of like also what the Hopi and all the other indigenous cultures say. It's full circle. We start here, then we go the journey like we did over this last year. We examine, we explore, we research, we amplify, we show, but then it leads back to us. But you have to take the journey. People, like you said before, people go, oh, let's just focus on the solution. If you don't understand the problem, how can you focus on a solution, right? So you have to understand the problem. But the inner looking glass, the pineal gland, and I shared this on our channel, such an important subject. I mean, it's a whole universe within a universe. So I'm so glad that you're tackling this in a new webinar, Frank. And thank you for the opportunity to our viewers to save greatly until July 1st. So go use that offer, friends. Inspired to Know is the coupon code. Now, Frank, we have a lot of people that are coming on and have questions for you. And I'm going to start because some people took, they took a shortcut and send us messages beforehand so we could ask you those questions. And here's one from a woman you met, Janae. And her first question is, can you talk about the research you did for your webinar, A Tale of Two Timelines, which is a masterpiece? She goes into how did digging into the information about Dan Burrish's encounters with the J-Rod, the concept of doctrine of convergent timeline paradox, and time travelers from thousands of years in our future affect your awareness and your consciousness?
Wow, that's a deep one.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's our audience.
I love it. I love it. Well, the first thing I would say is that, aside from having known, and again, I have to credit Tanya. She's one of the first people to make me aware of a looking glass. But that was back when we were making a film called Packing for Mars. So for me, my focus was, I was on this cool secret space technology and this other like breakaway civilization, as we now call it. But I didn't really focus on it so much. And it wasn't really until these, cryptic videos began appearing that I stumbled on a year ago that you talked about, that I wrote an article about, which you saw on Jan Van Helsing's channel, that it kind of came full circle, because that made me look at the whole idea of timelines, because timelines is something that I was interested in, and for over the years regularly exchanged with certain scientists and researchers, which we know over here in Europe about. So here was this sort of a modern day hardcore message about timelines, about these two potential futures that were coming up at 2030. So, and all those subjects were subjects which had been in my circle and have been floating around, that I've been looking at all of them, Agenda 21, etc. But looking back then at the actual decision to make A Tale of Two Timelines, it was about, look, I have this huge database of knowledge and data and information that's been accumulating over the years. It'd be cool to do a webinar, and I opened my big mouth and all these people wrote me and I had to do it. So I committed myself to it. But then in the course of doing it, I'm like, well, what am I going to fill a webinar with that's interesting and worth the money? Because there's a lot of people doing webinars, and a lot of people know stuff about the looking glass from the past. But what I realized is that there are certain aspects of the looking glass, and you mentioned one of them, doctrine of convergent timeline paradox, which is people know very, very little about. And that to me became actually the most important part of all of that research, because, those looking glass guardians, they came and they went. Nobody really knows who they were and who they are. But nonetheless, and it's undeniable that the potency of their message is on the level of prophetic, what they were talking about, which in the year that's gone by has pretty much manifested around us, and we can see it now clearly, whereas it wasn't so clear back then. But looking back at this doctrine of convergent timeline paradox, you realize that you found out that there was not just the idea that there was an extraterrestrial on Earth, that humans were interacting with these, they called them J-rods, and what that meant, and the implications that, hey, there are actual real documents, there's real footage, there's an authentic story there, which is mind-blowing in itself. But once you get beyond that and you start looking at, well, what did they actually talk about, right? If there was this interchange between, in the case of Dan Burish and the J-Rod, over the course of years, they began this dialogue, which was talking about something which is fantastic, which was the idea of a paradox, which was created when future humans using looking glass technology came back to the present time here, just before something which they called a cataclysmic event was going to take place, which was going to lead to their future. And they were back here for two different reasons. And again, all these things are mirrored in the two different timelines that we have going on right now, and in the two different classes of people, which the Hopis talked about, with the ones that feel they're above everyone and the ones that are trying to live out the organic and trying to ground the organic timeline in the world. And that's what that doctrine was all about. So for me, it was uncanny how many parallels there were to the world with this sort of eclectic, esoteric information. And the process of putting and connecting all the dots for me brought in, of course, in a bit of knowledge I had about Earth changes, because we had done a film called Solar Revolution, which talked about these cosmic rays. It wasn't solar, and a lot of people think, what, solar panels? No, it's like solar revolution in terms of revolutionary thought, like a revolution in humanity in terms of reaching another level of consciousness. And we talked about that 10 years earlier. So here it was again, that theme was also involved because they were talking about some kind of a cosmic event. And when you look at all these events and you piece together all these diverse parts of it, you end up with this holistic picture of what is going on, and you can explain pretty much everything that's going on using that model. Now, it's not the only model that you can use to explain everything, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, there's this and there's that and there's my belief system and stuff. But this particular model, you could use it to lay as a grid work over top of what's going on in the world, and it was made it pretty much very clear what we're facing, who's behind it, and where it's going.
That was a deep and comprehensive answer to a deep and comprehensive question. Thank you so much. The next question here is Christine's in the live chat monitoring all your questions. So intuitively, she's picking the ones. And that's by Elizabeth Juarez. She says, I would like to know if Q gets predictions from the looking glass, and is Q a guardian of the looking glass? That's an interesting question.
Sure. Well, I never involved the Q element in this research because, first of all, it's relatively new. Secondly, the messages, there were several messages that were brought out by Q, whoever it is or whatever it is, that I know for a fact are off, like really off. And they were putting out negative vibes, because if you believe what's written in that cryptic Q message, then you are amplifying and sustaining a certain negative energy that I'm actually trying to uncover and throw out of this planet. Like, I think the reason that the Cabal has so much success with their anchoring of their transhumanist and what we would say negative timeline in terms of moving away from our full human natural potential is because they keep us in a certain frequency of thought. And if you involve people in those kind of frequencies of thought without, and you proclaim it, to be like, something that's truthful, then you're actually, it's like what they call it lush, and it's like there's these energy vampires out there that they can actually suck your energy and use it to anchor in their timeline. That's kind of how these timelines work. We go into resonance with certain information, and if we don't question that information, we're giving away energy and power that we as individual creator beings have without even thinking about it. And so quickly that happened. And so when I noticed that happening in the Q phenomenon, I realized, okay, it's an interesting phenomenon. It has its purpose. And yeah, they plagiarized the looking glass material, absolutely, because that's when I realized they were just a bunch of aggregators, whoever this group is. They aggregate information, and some of it is true, like all disclosure information out there. There's a lot of truth. And the reason it works is because there is a lot of truth behind it. But the problem I have with what is the part that isn't true. And in a few of the messages that I was talking about, I actually discovered that there was, I actually saw the lie. So I'm like, listen, my philosophy is I don't necessarily know 100% the truth, but what I try to do is either correct the mistake, or if I'm not sure, I leave it out. Because of that reason. Why should I put something out that I'm not sure about? Because if I am wrong, then I'm sustaining that frequency. So the short answer to the thing about Q is, yes, Q took stuff from the looking glass, but no, I don't think it originated that information. And it was, if you look at it also, here's another extension to the answer. If you believe in the polarity of a creator God or a being that, was sort of like our grandfather that grandfathered us as creative little g gods, then and there's this polarity which is symbolized in the Christian doctrine by Satan or Lucifer. and that person is supposedly the person who controls this world or in charge of this world in this dominion, trying to pull us away from the creator and trap us in a thought. Well, wouldn't you use really clever tools and really powerful people, and people that are really believable, and information that's really powerful to attract the people that are more intellectual, people that want information, that really want to find out that there's something, because we all sense there's something missing, there's something wrong in our picture of reality. So it's like a fishnet and you can catch all those people and you can distract them from things that are really important. And for me, and I'm sure a little bit about this too, John, because we've sort of bled into some of our conversations. You studied the monetary system, and I studied the monetary system, and anybody that does that, way back when, knows pretty much what are the most important topics out there that we actually could change our world with if we toppled this infrastructure, and nobody's really talking about them. Not relentlessly, not like people that are talking like Hugh, or like people that are pushing disclosure, and I love that they're pushing disclosure, but you got to ask yourself, why don't they talk about some of the things like the stuff we've talked about, like healing modalities that have been pushed aside or crushed, the banking system, which is keeping us enslaved? If we all did that relentlessly for half a year, that system would topple, and then we would have a new world, believe me, because we would enter into a new form of freedom. So I just kind of got off the track on that one, but
no. I think it was a great answer. I want to add just quickly to that whole Q phenomenon, because I did a deep dive, and I'm still observing it, right? There's a complexity to the information that is not in a linear timeline way. So the information presented is in a multidimensional way, and it goes into both the future and the past. So that's where the complexity of Q plays in, and some of the amazing things like years later, right, where you see, I can only say in terms of data, that's probably AI. I mean, I can only assume it's AI. That's as far as I wanted to go. It's very, very complex, far more than what meets the eye. So there is a sophisticated operation underway. And as you said, I think it has multiple purposes, right? And it had a positive effect as well. That's what I wanted to say. Okay, in my opinion. Jason says, any info on the great solar flash? Side note, there's a clip where Trump even talks about a great flash that is to come.
Well, I mean, the information about the flash is stuff that actually was covered. I'd covered that in A Tale of Two Timelines. It has to do with the fact that they've registered energy coming from the center of our galaxy in levels never before witnessed or never before picked up on their instruments. So there is this undeniable influx of cosmic energy, rays, particles, things that we know have a certain frequency and a certain resonance. And the thing is, we also have something else going on, and we also talked about that. We talked about the magnetosphere and the impending magnetic pole shift on the planet. That has to do with the fact that the Earth's magnetosphere has been diminishing and diminishing. And this causes, of course, more of these particles to reach us like never before. So what I try to make people understand is that there's never been a better time for you to utilize this energy. Okay, we have to assume that if there is this great creator force out there, which is giving us that there's no accidents in the cosmos, that these things all seem to be kind of coincidentally perfect for certain things like the evolution of the human species, then it's pointless to think in terms of them as being negative or affecting us negatively. Yeah, you could say that more of these charged particles could affect us negatively, but maybe through the way our frequency alters when we begin to meditate on and think about or open ourselves up to higher density, higher frequency thoughts, then we aren't maybe necessarily as affected by these negative things as before. So the time right now has never been better for us to utilize this influx from the cosmos to visualize, to energize us, and to think about what we would actually like our world to look like, to think about things that we would see out there in the world that would be happening if the new world, the new timeline, were actually manifesting. And I think the more of us that do that, the more we actually anchor in that frequency. So if there's going to be a flash, I mean, there's lots of talk about actual like a micronova, that our sun has this periodic thing that happens and that we're long overdue. Yes, all these things could happen. And if they're going to be the negative version, that they're going to come burn the planet, it doesn't matter what you think, honestly. You're going to be gone, right? In a flash, really. But if they're positive, then they're going to come and they're going to change us on a genome level. You know, we have an amazing interview we did with Dr. Michael Persinger in that film Solar Revolution, where he talks about how what it takes to actually make a change in the human genome. And he talks about how in the past, he gives a few examples how speech and, you know, voice and talking and language arose all around the planet simultaneously. It can only have something to do with the magnetosphere, which all of us are connected to. So we are, you know, in flux with the planet and with the cosmos. And so it's clear that there's something brewing, something is about to happen. But I think to put a date on it and a time on it is kind of pointless, because nobody's ever pulled that one off, really. Every time someone says a date, you know, usually it doesn't happen. But we can kind of look at a window around 2030, because yes, NASA actually substantiated what we put in that film about this explosion when this plasma cloud got pulled into the center of Sagittarius A, the black hole at the center of our galaxy, and released these massive energy waves. The scalar wave of that energy is already with us at 150 megahertz. So we're already deeply in it. But there's also the matter, the energetic, the actual energy of that wave. And it happened 26,000 years ago. They finally, you know, came out with it. And guess when it's sort of destined to slam into our planet? By coincidence, it's going to hit us around that same window of time between, you know, 2030, 2028 to 2032. So there's a lot of stuff coming. And I think the best thing we can do is prepare ourselves mentally for some freak show stuff, really, like some stuff that's going to happen that's really going to be, yeah, revolutionary is a mild way of putting it.
But Frank, there's one thing, and that is always connected to questions like these. People go, "Oh, there's always something happening," and then it's never happened. It never happens. And I always go, "What do you mean? Look at the world. Compare it to the world 10 years ago. Compare it to the world 5 years ago, 3 years ago. We are in a complete state of transformation. So to me, this is happening." And I don't know about you, but I go out this morning. I went out. I went for a walk very early with our 13-year-old Golden. It's a slow walk, okay? He's taking it easy, the old guy. And we went through a walk, and I went outside and I looked at the sky and I was like, wow, there's something happened overnight. There's a different energy here today. Something was cleared up, right? And these things continually happen. People heal. People that are now tapping into this higher vibration and higher consciousness that are actually, like you say, anchoring that in. They're having amazing experiences, synchronicities, everything's falling into place, versus the others who are on that dystopian artificial timeline. It gets worse and worse and worse. So it is happening. There's no doubt about it. Next question from our dear friend Wolfgang aus dem Wuppertal. Wolfgang is saying, Frank, what about RH negative people? Are they extraterrestrial? And Wolfgang, I just want to say, he's been with us for such a long time. We get great emails. We write back and forth. Wonderful spirit from Germany. So what's with the extraterrestrial and the RH negative?
Well, you know, I mean, I would be speculating, honestly. That is one subject that I've broached occasionally. And there seems to be evidence or indication that this particular group of people are definitely unique, obviously, but there's a lot of other indications that people who are not RH negative may be extraterrestrials as well. So what is an extraterrestrial in a sense? That's the big question that comes to me. It's like, you know, if we are souls, do we only reside on the earth, or is the galaxy and the cosmos out there indication that there's many other places for us to be, to live, to experience, and that when we end up on the earth as a soul, regardless of what sleeve we're in, what body we're carrying around with us, I think that aspect of it is less important to me. Now, you know, the more we're working on a film sort of in this area of discussion, you know, where there's a lot of people who are talking about connecting and being blended with some kind of extraterrestrial group. So there could very well be an experiment that took place by one such group. If there are extraterrestrials and they're here and they're watching us and they're interacting with us, why not? It could very well be that they're extraterrestrial. But I would never want to put my neck out and say, well, absolutely, they're extraterrestrials.
Frank, I got to tell you, I'm going to let you in on a secret. You know, I don't do doctors. So, you know, I don't know what my blood type is. To me, it's red. I mean, mine is red. I don't know about you, but my blood type is red. So, moving on, the other guy is asking, what is your stand on Project Bluebeam? That's a big one right now, right? And the fake sun with the planets behind the real sun. That's an interesting question. The other guy, Frank. Shoot. Shoot from the hip, man. Come on.
Man, Project Bluebeam. Yeah, I mean, that's one, you know, we've heard about for decades. I mean, let's look at what's going on right now, right? We have, last week, we had Stephen Greer with another incarnation of the Disclosure Project, a big conference at the Washington Press Club, right? Where he brought a new crop of people in who are telling us their experiences and their intel and their secret knowledge about what their experiences are with respect to extraterrestrial life or technologies, let's say. And some of the people that they brought into that circle of disclosure were the same people that for a long time were putting disinformation out there or were blocking the information for getting out there. And so now suddenly we're to believe that they've had a change of heart and now they're going to be putting out the truthful information to help us. So my radar goes up right away, my flag or whatever you want to call it, antenna. And I'm like,
exactly. Same here. Same
here.
And
then there's some of the people involved that they're calling themselves harbingers of truth. Like, let's just look at Stephen Greer, right? I mean, aside from how he looks, which almost looks extraterrestrial, you know, another film that we did was with a guy called Klaus Donna, who's involved in out-of-place artifacts. And one of the first things that he put out in 2001, going back to prehistoric times, you could almost say, was an exhibition where he showed a little alien that there was a whole story. They'd done genetic testing on it and everything.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, well, guess what? Then along comes Stephen Greer many years later with a film proclaiming he's got this breaking story and no one's ever seen this before. And he basically plagiarized Klaus Donna, never mentioned him, never mentioned the fact that he preceded him by over 10 years, probably actually more 15 years. And, you know, it's like, and now it's like, I don't know, it's like part of me is like, I don't want to be judgmental, but, you know, you have to ask yourself, where do you draw the line when, you know, does integrity and consistency matter anymore in the world? Like, if you listen to J.J. Hertog talk, you know, 30, 40 years ago, and we were just with him in Sedona, and he's talking now, and what he talks and how he talks and the messages he's talking about, it's the same thing. He's consistent. It's clear. He doesn't deviate and suddenly tell another story because he found out new information which was inconsistent. And so where do you draw the line between integrity and consistency, and it's okay to tell half truth for a long time, and then now suddenly come forward and say, okay, but now we have the whole truth? And so that ties into Bluebeam, because what do they tell us about Bluebeam? They're telling us about Bluebeam that we're going to be expecting to see an extraterrestrial invasion, but it's going to be a fake invasion done with holographic projections and fake, you know, AI and
technology that we don't probably even know about. Let's be honest.
Exactly, right? So who's that going to be coming from? And these guys have been out there for decades talking about this stuff. And what's really happened? Like, what is really, and it was ironic because I have a post on my Facebook about, there was a conference NASA did for disclosure a little while back, a couple of weeks ago. And when you listen to their conference, it's like kindergarten. They're like showing some really bad footage and say, well, this is all we got. This is the best we got. And it could be, and it might be, and we can't explain it. But it's like you're looking at going, what are these people? Have these people been living with their heads in the sand for the last 20 years? Like, what's going on here, right? And then you've got the whole other spectrum, which is Stephen Greer and the people he's brought to the table. Now, a lot of those guys are really, really credible. Clearly, you know, they're bringing out information, but it's got to go somewhere for me. It's got to move on, right? It's got to reach to a point where there's some kind of form of accountability. And that, because the accountability is like, how many crimes do we have to hear about? How many misdemeanors and things that are happening in the politics that directly or indirectly relate to the bigger picture that we have to swallow, where we never see any heads rolling, we never see any accountability. So is it all just this game that they keep going to keep us distracted from really the real issues? Because like I said to you earlier, for me, the real issues are the bioweapon, right? Nobody's talking about that. It's like it doesn't exist. It's like, oh, let's just keep meditating. Everything's going to be fine. Let's make plans for this and plans for that. But hey, if we don't take care of that bioweapon issue, there won't be anything to go plan in a few years, right? So why are we not addressing that big time all the time like some people are? And then, the UFO thing, I love the topic of UFOs. I have since I've been a kid. Yet at the same time, it's like, if you really did want to distract the population from the really, really big issues, which are the timeline related issues we started this conversation with today, wouldn't you put highly credible people into kind of this disclosure scene and just keep everyone kind of chomping at the bit, waiting for the next piece of information, intel to drop that finally proves that they're real, when those people who are claiming to be in touch with them already are? They've been here forever. They've the evidence in the archaeological records and in the cultural records show clearly that there was already a parallel civilization that's been around for eons. We show it in Klaus Donna's work as well. They've been around. The technology existed 50, 60, 100,000 years ago, which shouldn't exist, which shows you that there's something else going on. These are the hard questions we should be asking, but instead we have to ask ourselves, are we being lured away and enticed and tickled with ideas that might be interesting, but if they never go anywhere, we need to have them go somewhere. So blue beam, and the fake sun and all this stuff like that, like, yeah, great, but I mean, like, push it, like, go after that information and dig everything you can out about it and put it out there for people to talk about, because we have to talk about this stuff collectively together. And that's one of the other things that I noticed in our conversations since this year is we've done a lot of talking, and I think we've changed stuff simply because we put stuff on the table and said, look, this isn't the definitive truth, but doesn't it make you wonder? And here's some facts that maybe you didn't learn in school that you should think about, not to put you into a state of cognitive dissonance permanently, but to make you realize that the timeline and the investment you have in a certain thought structure, a certain system, may not be everything you believed it was. And maybe it's time to ditch some of that and begin looking more at a truthful version of reality.
Well, there's a thing, and I think your new webinar speaks to that, because it's about the inner looking glass. It's about activating our true capabilities. And there's one thing about information, that when you perceive it solely with the mind that is disconnected from higher spirit, that is disconnected from this higher self that has a much greater perspective, then you're always just catching you're kind of always catching your own tail, right? You're chasing your own tail, and you're chasing some external information, versus when you are connected, when you go within first, when you seek that connection, then you perceive it with the whole of your being, and you know intuitively, yes or no. I mean, it's just so simple. And we've had these conversations in private. We look at a piece of information together, and we both go yes, or we both go no. And that is because that's how we examine it. We examine it with the whole being rather than just with a disconnected mind. And I think that's what we need to do, generally speaking, when we research information. Of course, that's not what science will tell you, not Western science. That's not
because you're talking about the heart. You're talking about the heart-brain connection, the intuition, the things that are faculties that we have, which are very little talked about. The fact that we can use our heart as a compass. Even I often think, man, why didn't I bring that up in that last interview and stuff? Because you tend to always forget. You get into this mind stuff, logic, and logic is good. We were given these deductive reasoning faculties to be able to work our way through logic, but even logic has its limits. And so, yeah, I mean, things like all these things, you have to realize how far from your heart is it that you're going with this information. Does it ring true for you? And I think we can sense a lot of stuff. We have this built-in BS filter that a lot of us feel when something isn't right. We just know, because look, the truth has been fed into this field that we're living in. that, you know, the Schumann resonances, you know, this
Oh, the
embodiment.
truth is always in the field. It's always available.
It's there for us to tune into. We've gotten a little bit astray from that sensory perception device that allows us to bring that in.
Well,
And
we were on purpose disconnected from it, because when we are connected to it, we cannot be controlled. That's as simple as that. So I think that's the whole purpose of the control game, is to disconnect us from that divine sense, if you will. Opeth Divinity, again, another long time beautiful tribe member. So many beautiful comments and conversations. Has a question for you, Frank. Please enlighten us on my top research topic: lands beyond Antarctica, blue ice / dome / wall, the endless realm we live in. Are we blocked from other continents by frequencies? Great question.
well, you know, the only way for me to look at something like that is if you're saying that we're being blocked by frequencies, you know, okay, which you could say if we are living in some kind of a artificial matrix, which is being projected, and that we are living within this projection, then yes, absolutely. Why would there not be the possibility that we're being blocked, just like your radio signal? When you have a radio, you pick up one particular frequency, and if you were to think that just that one station is all there is, you'd be fooling yourself. There are other stations on other frequencies. So in that model, absolutely, why wouldn't there be other continents? It's not really my main topic of research, because I do explore the idea of the Schumann resonances a lot with the biophysicist friends I have over here. And in that model, the Schumann frequencies resonate at 8 hertz or 7.8 hertz, roughly, you know, 8 hertz being the prime frequency. And that can be calculated mathematically to a round sphere with respect to spherics, the speed of light, and the velocity of the Earth, and the size of the globe. That's the only way you can calculate those Schumann frequencies. And because you can calculate them, and because you can prove it from many different angles, for me, that's enough. Like, I think the world is crazy enough for me to have to then think, is there more beyond Antarctica? Is there more beyond that wall? I think, you know, I would highly recommend you figure out a way, if it's possible, and I've had this idea too a few times, if you could raise some money with a group of people, get on a plane and just fly it over the continent, make a big deal out of it, put it in the public, you know, like the way Branson flew his air balloon over, you know, from Atlantic around the world and stuff. You just make a big stink about it, and you document it. You do what you can to prove it, to document it. I know a guy who was an extreme sports athlete, who was a runner. He was an extreme runner. And his goal was to land on the shore of Antarctic and run toward the center and to the South Pole, sorry. And he actually had sponsors. He had, you know, Red Bull behind him, and he had a bunch of major sponsors. And in the end, they decided to pull out of the project. So all that was left for him was to do it privately. And he actually managed to raise 100,000 euros and find some Russian avant-garde pilot who was willing to fly him under the radar, because you're not allowed to fly over certain areas of the Antarctica. Certainly something that makes you want to raise a flag and go to wonder why. But he actually was able to be dropped off, and he documented his run like a maniac. He would run, you know, a few miles, put down his camera, his magnetic measuring device, retrace his steps, and he would do this as a solo runner. He literally ran twice. And he set a new world record, and he arrived at the South Pole, and he measured it, and he proved it. And of course, when he got there, he was met by a group of people that weren't particularly happy that he had done that without permission from all the different countries who are involved in a treaty down there. And but that may have more to do with the fact that there are, you know, according to some, like Eric Hecker was one of the people who was on the disclosure conference of Stephen Greer. He was saying that there is a directed energy weapon cloaked device, which is cloaked under the idea of a giant ice cube neutrino telescope at the center down there, which is actually not just there to passively pick up neutrino signals and determine more information about more distant parts in the galaxy, but that those actual devices were able to transmit as well. And there was 5,000 160, I think, of them transmitting at 2047 volts, accumulating something like 10 tera electron volts of energy and directing this up into the cosmos. And he was witness to that. So maybe that has a little bit more to do with why people are forbidden from going to Antarctica than the fact that there's some wall or some dome or something hidden there. Although I'm open to it, and I'm definitely interested in the Richard Byrd story about the an opening at the pole, because I think, to me, it makes a certain kind of sense that there would be openings at the poles, because if you have a spinning mass and anything, you take a glass of water and you begin spinning, what happens? You create, a hollow space, depending on how fast you spin it. So it could very well be that there are these entry points on the North and South Pole.
And we know about inner Earth civilizations from all cultures. So, I mean,
right.
Oh, there you go. That's the next question, literally. That's how connected we are. I just quickly want to say something in addition to your answer to the Antarctica question, which is really more general. If, in my experience, if you want to really perceive new information that is beyond the scope that you can currently understand, you have to first put yourself in a different state of consciousness, because if your mind is not programmed to register something, it could be right in front of you and you wouldn't see it because you don't know what you're looking at. You have no reference point because your mind works at a certain frequency at a certain level. If you open it through, let's say, meditation, right? If you open it through breathing techniques, all of a sudden you have a broader perception, and then you can look at information and get completely different takes on it. We cannot. It's literally the old thing. We cannot solve the problem with the same mind that we cannot solve the problem with the same mind that created it. And that literally means you kind of have to lose your mind to answer some of these questions and open it completely to a different form of perceiving. I think this is really the thread that goes through the answers here, because so many of the things you talk about, Frank, you can grasp at a mental level, but you kind of have to go deeper to really understand what they mean. And for that, you have to be open to open up. And Hannah Bita, who's also a longtime viewer of the Inspired channel, a dear friend. Hi, Frank.
There is absolutely an inner Earth civilization. I'm 100% convinced of that. Tanya and I know researchers in Austria that have been finding some very, very mind-blowing pieces of information about these civilizations. And there are, on the record, in the church records of Austria and certain places, tales and stories of beings that used to live in the inner Earth and came out of the Earth and traded with the outer Earth dwellers. And they would often trade things like salt for gold and things like that. And these are things that are real. So the question is not whether they are real, whether there is an inner Earth civilization. I think the question is more, is it really this giant cavern with a sun in the middle, and the sun is like rays, and there's like all this like parallel civilization pressed up against this inner continental wall? Or is it having more something to do with the fact that there are giant caverns, and these are absolutely real, under certain places of the Earth, in which civilizations have pulled back? Because maybe this goes back a lot longer. Our work with Klaus Donner shows that there's a version of history and a version of archaeology which contradicts everything that's in the modern archaeological school, modern school way of thinking, so that there has to be, very well could be, aspects of a civilization which a long, long time ago decided to retreat from the surface. Maybe it was another cycle where there was a magnetic pole shift. Maybe there was a cataclysm. I mean, it's anyone's guess, but it's an interesting thing because the records are there to prove that there really is this kind of a civilization.
What if, I'm just putting it out there, what if we are in the inner Earth, and there's another inner Earth, and there's another realm that is outside of us that is actually the real thing? So I'm just putting a picture out there. Tony Richardson, Tony was actually, I think I'm allowed to say this, she was at the last Yaddo retreat. We had some amazing breakthrough experiences together. Beautiful spirit. Thank you, Tony, for being here. What about the Schumann resonance and all the chatter with that. And some are saying it's showing our human DNA helix, and some are getting their higher frequency. What do you think about that, Frank?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm obviously very connected to some people that are on that cutting edge of the research. And when that anomaly, that I'm assuming she's talking about this strange anomalous pattern which suddenly appeared on the Tomsk measuring station reports, readouts that looked like, you know, some magical, like I called it like a crop circle with respect to magnetics, possibly, right? An impression that was being left in the magnetosphere, possibly. But you know, you can't just jump to those conclusions. And again, I just had to shake my head. I got so many messages from people saying, this is it, they're here, you know, we're changing, this is the sign, you know, it's now the information's coming, it's going to change civilization. And I'm watching it and I'm going, yeah, where have I heard that one before? And have you looked deeply at it? Is there other sources? And the first thing I started to do is looking at other measuring devices. And guess what? None of them picked anything up. And then, you know, and there were some people that even wrote Tomsk, and eventually they got an answer. And before we even got that answer, I mean, there's in data streams as intensive as the ones that are being used to measure these systems out there. They have to come up with ways when they run out of bandwidth. They have to come up with new technology to either a whole new form of data transmission, or they have to figure out a way to optimize the existing forms of data transmission with a better method. And one of those methods is called PAM4. And PAM4 is a way of bundling frequencies and energies and information to get double the bandwidth out of the normal signal. And guess what? When you look at how PAM4
so it's
looks,
kind of like a zip file.
Yeah, something like that. Like like encryption. You know, it's a form of compression, right? And when you look at that, when you actually go and research PAM4, you will find waves that look identical to those that appeared in the Schumann Tomsk measuring station. And guess what? Sure enough, Tomsk had to pull that stuff down and say, sorry, that was an error. And, you know, a lot of people are going to say, yeah, of course they're going to say that. But I mean, I would say, yeah, if everyone in the world picked up that same signal, it would be, and if it continued, John, like, you know, the next day, the day after, it's like, this was it. The signal was hit. We're getting information. They're here, blah, blah, blah. Well, then there would be sustenance. It would continue. It would be follow through. Like what I mentioned earlier with the disclosure, there needs to be follow through. And when you put all these pieces together and you realize, okay, it can be explained, there's a clear logical explanation. Even people that figured out the musical notes of that pattern were thinking, well, that's proof that there's more to it here. But there's something called cymetics. And if you look at cymetics are a way to take sound frequency and push it into certain matter like sand corns or metal filings, and certain tones will create certain shapes, patterns. Right? And the universe is mathematical. It's amazing. The universe, the more I learn about the electric universe, I realized that there's this fractal math behind everything. You know, we showed that on one of our shows about the magic of number 9. Or sorry, no, we showed, no, I got to show you this. Here, just have a quick look at this, okay?
We did talk about it, yeah.
This is the magic of number 9, right? If you reduce it, you know, if you multiply it all the way up and keep reducing it to the prime root, it doesn't matter. You always end up with 9, even to the point where if you start from, you know, backwards from 6 down, you end up 45, 54, you know, 63 was 36, 72 was 27. And it continues that pattern, right? It just shows us that there is this kind of a magic to the universe, to certain signals and certain combinations. So is it a big surprise to me that people figured out some kind of a note structure of that pattern? Not at all, because that's just cymetics. And I swear that if you were to take any software that's out there and you can translate any software, any code out there into actual binary code, into frequency numbers, into a mathematical formula, and you could create music out of it, and you would have some tones, you would have some melodies. This is nothing new. We just have to be very, very careful and vigilant nowadays, because I'm noticing there's this potential energy. Everyone wants something to happen. So any small thing that happens, even if it's an error, like the Schumann frequencies depiction at Tomsk, they like you see all these people jump on the bandwagon and instantly declare it's the new age, it's happening, that's the proof. But what happens is that it never follows through. So, it's just a sign to us to be careful, not just to jump on every single little thing and immediately proclaim it's, hallelujah, right? If it's real, you can wait. You don't have to be the first one to report it. You don't have to be the first one to see it, because if it's real, it's going to keep coming. Because realness in terms of this evolution that people expect has to do with collective frequency. A lot of us have to collectively vibe and resonate at a certain level where we actually begin to change the outside world. I think the Mandela effect is a great way to explain that. That's a sign of how we've collectively changed something in the field. We can actually not even find certain things any longer because we've changed it collectively through resonance. And so anything that's real, it doesn't require a one-off event, one crop circle, or one failed Schumann frequency display for, we just have to be on our game a little better, because, the people on the other side are laughing their asses off at us, thinking, oh my God, look at them. There they are again, thinking that, the Messiah is here. And it's like, it just discredits the whole movement. And it sort of makes me shake my head a little bit. I wish people would just be a little cooler, keep cooler heads. Don't just throw science out with the baby with the bathwater, as they say. Use some science, use your heart, use your intuition, connect it with some other sources. How many people do clickbait? They pass along some crazy Telegram message. And then if you were to look at the article, Elon Musk has got a new CBD company or something, right? All of a sudden, it's like all these articles. But if you do some research in 5 or 10 minutes, not even much research, you realize, no, it's not real. So we have to get in tune with reality.
I agree. In the age of TikTok, 10-minute read might seem like too much for a lot of people. Vladimir is asking. Yeah, that's a good question. Is it more important at this stage of our development to understand and take control of our inner being rather than idea what the external world is like? It's a great question, expanding on what we discussed. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to take control of your inner being in the sense of who is your inner being? Do you know who you really are? How many people know who they really are on the earth?
I'm not right John Nolan of the Inspire channel.
Right. There's the straw man, right?
Yeah, there is
the straw man really, right? Who are you really? What is your potential? Are you a creator being, or are you just an accident? A banging together of rocks and molecules over an infinite number of multiverses until that one universe happened that is ours, right? The ultimate wet dream of the atheists, the transhumanists, right? Who want to now improve on the universal code that they're starting to decipher. Or are you a creative being?
It would be the first improvement on their part in history, but that's a different subject. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, looking at the outside world is part of it, but, only in the sense that, where have you been fooled and how much of the outside world have you used to shape your inner being?
And I want to add to that, Frank, because I appreciate the kind of the pioneers of this age that are doing it in ways that people can actually relate to. Like, for example, a Wim Hof. Take a Wim Hof, right? I mean, the guy is taking something that it has been known to the Eastern philosophies and to the Eastern spiritual world and to the Eastern world at large as a completely natural practice of using breath to activate the spine, to bring the divine consciousness in. And he's made it available to the masses now by showing, hey, I can hold my breath for 10 minutes. I can stay in ice water for God knows how long. I can climb Mount Everest in my bare feet. And all of a sudden you get the attention of people. But really what he's demonstrating is what inner work does and what the connection, because really it's spiritual work. Let's face it, you're activating something. So I think it was a very important question, and it kind of seems to be what we're talking about here anyways. Andrea Thomas says, if we're multidimensional, then would there be an overlay of different interpretations and different actions taking place?
Okay, well, I mean, I would look at like multi-dimensions is something for me that I'm trying to look and question this multiverse thing a lot lately, because I'm asking, where does it come from? And it has a little bit to do with what I just said about this atheistic, the heliocentric model of the universe, which is that there is no creator. And so multi-dimensional to me means something different now. It has more to do with frequency of thought, because I'm talking about timelines, and I'm talking about how we change timelines and how we give the wrong timeline energy through unconsciousness. And the minute we begin to, listen to our thoughts in our mind and figure out a better, a truer version of reality, we've changed our frequency. We enter into another kind of dimension in a way, because we're vibrating with different qualities of thought. And we attract, as a result, we attract others who are also vibrating along those lines, and we begin to shape another form of the universe, another dimension, you might say, that we walk into. Because if I look at my world and my dimension, the people that I've resonated into my timeline, it's hard for me to really find people who are not conscious, and I can very quickly identify those who are unconscious, or who need help, or who you should stay away from. So the way you can also change your dimensions is because when you come to a certain evolutionary realization in your consciousness, where you realize, oh, wait a minute, the old me with limited thinking used to believe this was the cause of something, but now I see that actually wasn't the cause, that I wasn't the victim, that I actually was the creator of that event. And when you do that, you actually change what happened. So you're actually, in a way, you're changing the past of what happened, and you're changing the universe in that sense. So you're entering again into another, what I could say, another multi-dimension, another dimension of a kind of a multi-dimensional consciousness. But the thing is, a lot of these things are heady concepts, like we said earlier. They're very mental. Yeah. So
And
invest a bit of time in it, but don't get hung up on it.
And isn't there, so my perspective, we talked about this in different conversations, where we also said, okay, so here's something that started happening, I would say probably 100 years ago, give or take, where I think a reconnection of spiritual principles began to happen. Like, for example, you have a big thing like Paramahansa Yogananda came from India, came to America, and started teaching people about meditation and Kriya Yoga. And this was what people would call the beginning of the New Age movement, right? And so I think what happened was that these dark forces jumped on that and said, okay, this is dangerous, because here truth is being reunited. We don't want that. So they jumped and took principles of that new knowledge that was coming and hijacked it and steered it in a different direction. The reason why I'm saying this is because all these heady conversations are not happening in the Eastern philosophies. They don't talk about these things as much. They say, okay, here's how you meditate. Here's how you get there. Now figure it out. Now go there and experience it, right? The Western way is heady, trying to figure this out in the head, but you can't. So do you think, that's my follow-up question on Andrea's question here. Do you think, now that we've had these discussions and you've done research, that this is actually what happened, that these true philosophies were hijacked and formed into this partially right but mainly wrong New Age movement?
Well, the more I look at that, is it's clear to me that if you were trying to control this world and this timeline and steer society toward a certain direction, and you had loads and loads of money, powerful influence, a global network, why would you not hijack any system that's out there which could potentially pose a threat to your existence, to your ideology? And I think this is what we're seeing is really going on out there. They hijack these narratives, they mislead us, and they keep us away from talking about the important things. I got to check out this quote I just found the other day. This is
They took yoga. They took yoga and turned it into a way to sell leggings that make women's butts look better. I mean, literally, that's what they turned yoga into, right?
Right, exactly. And so in the meantime, while we're arguing about yoga postures and different, gurus and who's got more of the truth and less of the truth, they're advancing what they're trying to do. And there's this quote, from the EU that I'll just put it up on the screen for a second. It says basically, we decide on something
I just
leave
shared
it
that a week ago, Frank. Go ahead.
leave it lying around, right? And wait to see what happens. And if no one picks up a fuss or kicks up a fuss, because most people don't understand what has been decided, we continue step by step until there's no way, no turning back, right? And the reason I have the global health passport there is because we heard about that global passport months ago, but it's like, who's on that anymore, right? It's like, you gotta push this stuff, right? But it's not. So they throw it out there, and then meanwhile people go back to their game, their whatever. So you have to be very careful, I think, in this world, to not let your disciplined philosophy or new age belief system become the driving force of your being, but rather just look at it as another deck of cards that you can get information from about who you really are. But in a way, you're much more than that. And if you rely too heavily on these other sources of information, then you're giving away, again, your own personal power in terms of what your job and what your role here in the earth right now is all about. Let's face it, those of us incarnated on the planet right now are very, very special souls. We came here at the most critical time of in eons. Okay, let's say there's other cycles, but we don't know about them. We just know about this cycle. And the Hopis talk about the cycle on the prophecy stone. And there's a very real moment that we've all come, and we're all going to experience it. And so we all have something very special that we had the privilege to come here during this time to experience. So are you going to be passive and just follow along and be a consumer? And that can mean a consumer of belief systems, or are you here to be an active creator being who's going to shape the destiny of future generations on the planet?
Boom. That's the question. Thank you, Frank. Tommy Bird, is LGBT and all the other letters? I mean, somebody asked, who actually decides on when to add a letter? I thought that was a great question. Is there like a council? Oh, we're going to add a new letter. Is LGBT a satanic religion in which they have to change sex? I heard about the presidents are transgender. What do you know about this?
Well, that's the first I've heard of that, honestly. I never thought about
Well, we
that.
know about Michael. We know about Big Mike, right?
Well, right. I mean, the fact is people have been changing their sex for a long time. I didn't ever really connect it to the idea that there was some kind of a satanic particular branch of Satanism which requires you to change your sex. But I do know that the people that are behind transhumanism are moving us away from identifying with sex to bring us to a place where we are genderless. And those people tend to fall into the satanic camp, if you will, that's predominantly spreading its wings on the world right now in ways that it never has before. And so, yeah, is that part of it? I can't answer that, but I just can say that I think the idea that people need to change their sex is denial. It's a major form of denial of self, right? They're trying to make you believe that you should acknowledge their self, who they are, but they don't even do it. They don't even start at the fundamental aspect in their body and why they are in that body, which happens to be masculine or feminine, male, female. They're denying it. So until you're through that, process of learning why you're denying that, they're still kids. They're being formed and pushed into something which I think is really dark and devious and damaging to society. And again, falls very much in line with what we've been covering and talking about for months, this agenda that's being pushed. It's undeniable that there is an agenda and that there's this artificial stimulus out there to push us toward it. Sorry for any gay people, but I mean, I think people that are gay and are working that out, I mean, why should there be a problem with that? And why should society have a problem with that? And I think anybody who's an advanced soul, it's not an issue. Like, I've got gay friends, I've got non-gay. Like, it's not an issue for me. And actually, that's where all of society should be. It's not how you choose
your friends anyways, right? It's not like you go, hey, what's your sexuality?
Sorry. Right, exactly. It doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with, the bigger picture. But the fact is that it's being kind of forced on us by a concentrated agenda, which is politically motivated and ultimately motivated to steer us toward a genderless society, disconnected from values of the family, from the idea of a wholesome family with a masculine feminine polarity. I mean, look at the way the world has evolved in our lifetime alone. There were a lot less divorces when I was a kid as there are now. Now there's all these broken homes. They're saying that basically every out of 3 marriages, every 2 of them break up or destined to break up. It shows you that there's this instability, and there's a lack of for the children to identify with these traditional polarities. And that's, you could say, intentional. I mean, I can show you some interesting videos about how the KGB and the Bolshevist movement was actually deliberately infused into the American culture to move us and confuse us gender-wise and family unit-wise and things like that. So ask yourself those questions too when you're looking at, even if you're somebody who's still exploring this gender issue personally. Well, but I think society should be free enough to let people do what they want.
This is the most sophisticated kind of warfare, is where you don't fire the shot. You go and actually ideologically infuse a society with these ideas. But I think these vehicle and LGBTQ plus is one vehicle that was created as an entity that is identifiable and now overtaken for a specific purpose. It does not mean that the people that are part or consider themselves part of this community are inherently bad at all. It's being done on the backs of a lot of good people, like always. But same with the Catholic Church. It was built up over 2,000 years, and it has turned out to be a vehicle for a lot of bad stuff, right? So we have these, like you say, these agendas. But one thing is for sure, this whole transgender thing is, like you say, it's a denial of the divine creation that we are. And to reverse it or change it has these dark satanic roots, because it means deny who you are in your divinely created way, and you as your ego human self decide and change and alter. And I think you're spot on that, Frank. So we're absolutely in alignment on that. Angela Gabrielle, is there a portal under the Untersberg in Austria? I wanted to ask you that. These questions are so synchronistic today, because we talked about this 15 years ago, remember? Go ahead.
I should really have Tanya here for these kinds of questions. That's a topic that she's heavily into, and I mean, I can't really comment too much on it. I think that, there's a lot of, there's authors, there's people talking about this, and
it's definitely a famous mountain in Salzburg. It's a very famous place. Yeah.
I can only say, come to Salzburg and rent a hotel and Hotel Untersberg if necessary, and just go there and feel it for yourselves. People have been talking about some kind of portal or entry for forever, but it's difficult to find it. So go there and explore it for yourself, because I think, to tell people that there is one is misleading, and maybe it's a symbol for something greater. Maybe there's something, again, here's a story, which we have a lot of these truths in our society that talk about greater issues that are embedded in these legends that actually mean something else. And so it's important not to necessarily get literally into the topic of, oh, is there a portal and blah, blah, blah. Hey, I could say there's probably a portal right over there if I'm locked in to the right frequency that I could walk through. There's portals that make the looking glass function. The way the looking glass functions is if it's placed in vicinity of certain stargates, which are portals. So there's portals all around the world. So yeah.
And speaking of Austria and that, that's something you share too, is a lot of people feel very, very good and very, very high vibing in certain churches, especially when there's no mass or nothing going on, when they're alone there. Because most of these churches are built on ley lines that are crossing, right, where the highest energy point is. Yes, and then if you know the rituals that are being performed during mass, they knew about it. They created the rituals, and then they let the rest of the truth kind of let it go away. So the priests today mostly don't know what they're doing. But that's why people feel a certain way in certain places, because there are places on Earth that are energetically higher. You can call them a portal, a crossing of ley lines. The name really doesn't matter, but there are different things possible there than in other places, for sure. Awakened CPH. Frank, do you think that the collective West versus BRICS plus, he says unipolar, or she versus multipolar narrative is nothing but the ultimate divide and conquer? Well, man, you're getting a lot of different questions today.
This is covering a broad spectrum. This topic for me centers more around the bigger picture about currency, and that has to do with the global move toward universal digital currency that is going to connect our biometric ID individually to one currency. And people make a big joke about whether that's true, that there's going to be one currency and stuff. I have a couple of headlines here. I'll just put them up real quick on the screen. Like, this is really current stuff. June 20th, right? The IMF just announced a single global digital currency push to eliminate cash, right? And, Canada, that wonderful man over there in that picture, he just set up a deal with the World Economic Forum to unleash digital IDs. So that means basically you guys are next. So the bigger issue here is, and the whole thing, BRICS. I mean, these are, if they have their way, this is going to be obsolete. All these things are going to be completely obsolete in very, very short time. People are already talking about changing this year. There's going to be some kind of a crisis that they're going to use to precipitate this changeover. I continually, after the Looking Glass Guardians sort of imploded and that other group emerged, the We Are Sovereign group, they've been putting out a series of what they call intel drops from this Gideon guy who's connected to these white hat hackers. And, I've been an arm's length person just looking at their data, because I can see on the one hand how it is clickbait to kind of lure you in toward participating with them. But on the other hand, they're dropping a lot of really truthful, powerful information into these intel drops. And it has to do with using the world, situations in the world that create panic and fear to implement a new kind of currency, which is where they're moving. And so this for me, the BRICS thing is just another form of a distraction, because they've really got a bigger agenda that they're going for here. And if we don't stop them from doing that, that's far more dangerous than you could pretty much say anything, because other than the bioweapon we've been talking about, cursing in our bloods, the other most important issue is if we lose that bit of sovereignty in terms of the freedom using cash to purchase and in exchange with each other, then what's left? I mean, you can't even buy groceries. You can't fill your car with gas. You can't even buy a car or a car that they want you to have, as opposed to one that you'd like to have, if you're in that system. So the key here is to stop that system and not get so much caught up on BRICS and us versus them and evil Putin and, wonderful Biden, or whatever side of the fence you're on.
Who says wonderful
These are
Biden?
all just issues to
met
distract.
a person that says that. Wonderful Biden? Those are two
Hey,
words
listen, just
I've never heard in a
man.
sentence together before.
Just subscribe to Quora. You'll get these daily mails, and they'll say, "Why is Biden such a great president and Trump's so bad?" And then they'll list 10 things Biden's done that are just amazing, and how many people love him. He's the most popular president. People actually believe this stuff.
It's called Chat GPT, Frank. Come on, that's what I mean. Come on. But here, I just want to. Oh, thank you so much. I'm getting to this question, but BRICS, you said something. And I want to ask the viewers, go research a few things. What is the main agenda of the individual BRICS nations and the collective BRICS nations? Is AI a part of it? Is digital health a part of it? Are digital IDs a part of it? Is digital currency a part of it? Because coincidentally, the two fighting fractions, the West and BRICS, are doing the exact same thing. Guess what? Where they agree? Antarctica Treaty, they're all on there. Guess what? The international health regulations that the WHO wants to implement May 2024, every nation, 194 nations are in agreement, no opposition, including the BRICS nations. Go figure. Digital health passports and digital ID, one and the same thing. They're all in agreement. So this is like Pepsi and Coke. They're just playing a game here. Whether you want Pepsi or Coke, it's the same freaking deadly beverage. Okay. Sorry.
No, beautifully said. It sums up a lot of what's going on right there.
Third Eye Bodega, thank you so much for your contribution. It's highly appreciated. Any recommendations for those connecting with light beings and having intense, unexplained experiences with proof and witnesses? I need a mentor. That's a great question.
Well, you have to be careful when you're one of those persons who are making these contacts, because you want to make sure that your information doesn't get hijacked by somebody with nefarious intentions who's looking for this kind of information, to block that kind of information. I would say, again, use your heart, your compass, and be open to finding those connectivities, those people. Sample and gather as much of the information as possible. And try to not block, I guess in a way with I guess the hardest thing is to block with your logic somebody that actually might be good for you, as opposed to somebody, or in other words, you could attract somebody who's bad for you using logic. Whereas if you're blocking the logic, you're not opening to your heart, you might actually be turning your back on somebody who's there to help you. I don't know if that made any sense, but let me give you an example. Last weekend, we went hiking on a mountain, and okay, nothing spectacular about that, but we got in a car, we got a late start, and I was kind of in a pissy mood because of that. And I was, coming up with all these arguments. We're never going to get a parking spot there now. Everyone's going to be there. It's the weekend. We're going to forget it, right? So we pull up to the place, and guess what? There was no parking places, right? And I manifested it. And then I did manifest one parking spot, and I got out of the car thinking, oh, awesome. And no, guess what? That is a private parking spot. And someone came out and told me to leave right away. So I left, and beside me, Tanya was going, no, we're going to find a parking spot. And in the meantime, I'd raced to get a parking ticket, and it was more expensive than I thought it was going to be. And I was all angry, right? So we drive around the parking lot some more, and I'm thinking, this isn't going anywhere. And what happens is that Tanya rolls her window down by a couple walking beside us, and it's an American couple of all people, and in the middle of Bavaria. And they're like, oh yeah, we have a parking place right up there. You can have our spot. And then we drive up to them, and not only that, but they actually reach inside their window and they pull out their parking stub. And if I hadn't have been so stupid, I would have actually gotten free parking for the day as well. So the lesson is, and it didn't stop there, right? So now we're on the path, we're walking up. It's way the hell up there. We're exhausted coming back down, and we make a break coming back down. What happens is I set my phone down, unbeknownst, right? My mobile phone, and which was turned off, but I just wanted to have it there for some pictures and things. And I left it there, I don't know, somewhere up on the mountain. And we got all the way down, and I'm like, oh, I should get this. And I go to reach for my phone, and guess what? My phone is gone. And I'm like, oh my God, I've got to go back up that mountain again. It just took me 2 hours to get up before I'm going to die. I'm going to lose my phone. And all the negative thoughts are coming. And I was blocking. And I'm looking, and I'm frantically looking on the side of the road for my phone, and it's nowhere to be found. And all of a sudden, this couple walks up, and they said, what's going on? Are you looking for something? And I'm like, yeah. And they go, what are you looking for? And I said, well, I lost my phone. Would it be this phone? And they pulled my phone out, and they gave me the phone. And I'm like, wow, if that isn't proof of magic and angels in the universe, right? And if I wouldn't have been open to it, if I would have been too stubborn, I probably would have ran past them, right? So what I'm getting at here is, when you're connecting with light beings, that's on that level. It's like, it's very subtle. You don't see it really at first, but it's all around you. So those two events were proof pure of the magic in the universe. And I almost blew it if I hadn't had somebody with me that anchored in the feminine energy. I probably would have walked past all those experiences and never would have had that magical experience. So I hope that answers the question.
I think that's a beautiful answer. And it is, intention is the key point here. Like, you can channel all kinds of beings. I mean, there's no shortage of beings that cannot incarnate, that want to be part of your experience and even influence you. So that's a much more critical subject than what meets the eye, to me at least. And having a lot of experience in it, I second what you just said, Frank. Absolutely. Second, Joshua, how can it not matter that the heliocentrism religion is controlling this realm?
Okay, it's a double negative question. Okay.
Well, how can it not matter? I think it was implying certain statements that you made. Does it really matter in the big scheme of things? And what would change if we now figured out, well, the Earth is flat and really we're at the center? Okay, shoot.
Well, I think just looking at where heliocentrism came from is a good start, and what there was before heliocentrism. And there's some interesting new material that's emerged that supports the geocentric model of the world. And it doesn't mean it has to be flat Earth or the dome and all that stuff. It's actually there's a lot of really interesting information that looks out into the cosmos, which in a flat Earth model shouldn't exist, which actually proves in a way, maybe doesn't necessarily 100 prove that it's geocentric, but also shows that the heliocentric model cannot be true or cannot be the only model. And one of the most convincing arguments to the faults and flaws of the heliocentric model argument is the margin of error, right? When you're doing experiments as a scientist and you have a margin of error of 2 or 3, your experiments is going to fail. You have to go and put the aspects of the experiment, that you got wrong. You have to fix those and run the experiment again until you get it. Well, the margin of error behind the heliocentric model is 10 to the power of 120. Okay, that's 10 with 120 zeros behind it.
So there is a chance.
There is a chance.
There is a chance.
There's a chance. It's the greatest conspiracy theory in the world.
What is that? 120.
Don't even
120
bother.
zeros. I don't know what that name is.
I don't even think there's such a number. Quintuplets, whatever. I don't know.
Something. Yeah, something. Okay. Yeah.
So well, yeah, I mean, and ultimately it doesn't matter really what system there is, but I think it's important not just to throw our system, our world around, like the fact that there's this whole simulation theory out there right now. This is all just a simulation. If you're looking that way, the world stops existing behind you. But that could be a trap, because it could take away from accountability. Because if everything's just a simulation and everyone
what does it matter what we do?
What does it matter anymore, right? Whereas if things are real and they hurt, there's a reason for that. And the lessons you learn to understand that you're a vulnerable being, that you're not invincible, that you should be humble, and that you should have a certain humility with respect to what's out there. I mean, if you think you're an invincible being, just step out. Well, I don't want to say this, but all you have to do is step out in front of a car and it's over. You're not invincible. So it's a certain amount of humility needed to accept that, things are real. But even within that model, just the idea of how you accept things around you, like in what filter do you put on and what spin do you put on things determines what kind of a reality, what sort of a dimensional quality, what kind of a frequency that information has. You can choose that, and then you can do a lot to change your frequency of thought and therefore change your reality. And maybe at some point, if enough of us kind of figure out to push the tipping point of our world toward this natural biological human timeline, we'll begin to actually be able to walk through walls, or we may not even need walls anymore, may not even need cars anymore. We will have these abilities, these telepathic abilities, these psychokinetic abilities. It'll change the quality of our life. And so that will form and enter us into a whole new miraculous form of existence that we can't even imagine right now. So why put too much importance on it right now?
And Frank, isn't this also a problem that we have, especially in the Western sphere, in a Western cultural sphere, is that our science is so limited in its way, and that's how people explore these things, with the scientific methods that they learned, right? But you go to Eastern Europe or further into the East, and they include consciousness in science, and they include higher vibration in science, and they include at least as unknown factors. And so then you get a multidimensional approach. I still believe that we cannot understand things until we are spiritually evolved enough and evolved enough on a consciousness level to examine it through different lenses, because our science is still based on, okay, let's take this living being, let's kill it, let's cut it open and understand how it lives. That's the biggest, that's the idiocy of our science. And that's why we're continually creating death cultures, because we need to kill it, because we think once we kill it, we can understand how it lives. And I think that is the fundamental flaw that was put into our way of scientific research. Do you agree with that on particularly with that question?
Well, yeah, and I think that leads right on to the idea of the germ theory, and that there's this single organism, a virus, in one particular form, which lands on your body like an invading army and spreads throughout your system until you're dead, until you're heavily, influenced by its poison. But that completely ignores another concept out there, which is proven, which is called pleomorphism. And pleomorphism, just look up that word, right? It talks about how particles and organisms change their shape. They change their shape. They have an evolution depending on their environment.
Well,
These
that's
are
like we are.
right.
That's like we are. I mean, we change over time, but also our genetic expression changes depending on how we live and what our thoughts are, what our actions are, what the energetic field is that we live in. So I mean, everything is connected to that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just this is the model of being in either you're part of the whole or you're an individual, and your body ends where your skin ends. And the germ theory pretty much reflects that, because it's saying that there's this one particle with, that they can identify, which has one, is the cause of one particular illness, rather than looking at it as, hey, there's this whole environment, and our bodies don't end where our skins end. They extend out to the sky, to the, right to the boundaries of our stratosphere, and we're connected to that. In fact, even further, and that's what we're going to learn in the inner looking glass, is that, how far it just does extend, right? So yeah, I don't want to give too much away.
Fantastic. Frank, we have two more questions for you. Thank you for taking so much time for this truth marathon. Mio or Mayo is asking, how can we ever really reproduce experiments, because we assume time is a constant, even though we set the speed of light because it would always vary. Experiments vary depending on the date, question mark. I've never thought about that experiments are influenced by our concept of time, but what's your take?
Well, I think you have to make a decision when you're making an experiment that you're going to be working within a certain module, a certain concept. And if your experiments are based around the idea of the speed of light, then set them up as such. But if you want to do experiments that are based on things that transcend speed of light, it's another quality, it's another kind of experiment. And it's another, it's basically another group, or another, maybe even just, you could call it a belief system. Because physicists that have locked on to existentialism, about, that they're atheists, they have one particular model of looking at things, and their experiments are always going to be predictable within that model, and things that don't fall within that predictability quotient of their world are ignored. And that includes even things that extend to archaeology and other fields of science, where you realize that, hey, like Klaus Dana was the perfect example. His findings and his unsolved mysteries exhibit had over 400 artifacts, which would, totally crush the accepted model of archaeology if even one of them was true. And so, I think we have to begin thinking in terms of, okay, well, there's this model, then there's the quantum physics model. The double slit experiment says, if you're not looking, the particles will go through one slit, and as soon as you give it your attention, it'll go through the other one. Yeah, which means that we affect the actual matter through our consciousness. Now, that alone is one thing, but to think in terms of like, okay, well, how am I affecting it? What am I bringing to the table? So there's people that are bringing to the table a lower form of consciousness, which is locking us into a certain, concept, a certain structure of society, a certain monetary system, a certain limited form of philosophy, maybe. And then there's others that are not bound by that. I think that what we're heading into is a phase where we begin, like you were mentioning, the Indian, sciences and things, where we begin to compare notes from many more disciplines rather than just one. And maybe part of the clue to finding the real answer is to open ourselves up to some other possibilities, some other explanations that fall outside of our version of the model that we studied in school or wherever we learned it.
It's interesting how many examples come up when you talk. I even thought of a very simple one that might seem disconnected, but it's not. Like, for the longest time, they've done this experiment where they tried, how fast can a human run 100 meters, right? And it would continually be above 10 seconds until someone, and they said, you can't make it in under 10 seconds, right? That's what the experiment shows. It's impossible. So then someone ran it under 10 seconds, and what happened was an explosion of people who ran it under 10 seconds. Now everybody that's in running runs it under 10 seconds. So you go, okay, so what was that particular thing? Was it consciousness? Was it a new piece of information, at least new to us, that was put into the field and then absorbed by those to whom it mattered, like the people who wanted to run faster, right? To them it mattered. To me, I couldn't care less, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't even come close to 10 seconds anymore. I used to, but not anymore. So, but to those who mattered, all of a sudden they absorbed the ability. Was it through consciousness, belief systems? It was a combination of all of it, but it includes quantum physics for sure, because it's the field, really, right? So, such a simple experiment that can be applied to so many areas, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, Tanya and I made a lot of, we produced a series called Ultimate Rush for Red Bull. And there were a lot of these athletes. I would ask them those questions, like, because they were doing things as athletes, which 20, 30 years ago were literally impossible. Like and you wonder, like, how can they now do it? Like, what is going on here, really? Even the X fighters, whatever they call them, where they do motorcycle jumps that, back, when I was a baby, there was this guy called Evil Knievel. He was jumping like, I don't know, 10 or 15 or 20 cars, like, and barely made it, right? Or broke every bone in his body doing it. And these guys now are not only are jumping the same distance, actually doubling what he did, but they're getting off their bikes midair, doing somersaults and waving to the crowd. It's like, how is that even physically possible? And that just means that, and the key is that what you said, the field. Every time one of us makes this experience, we deposit our experience into that field. This is where Burkhard Heim's model of the 12th dimensional universe comes in, which is fascinating, which we also talk about in Solar Revolution, where essentially once you've deposited that electron into the field, it's picked up by somebody else and they carry it into their world, and it begins this feedback process. And actually the entire field around us right now is nothing but a collection of every single thought and deed and action and everything that's ever been recorded by the human race through all time. So that's how I think it happens, is we bring that in, we tune it in, and we go, oh yeah, of course I can do that. You kind of already, and a lot of the athletes would say they already see themselves after the stunt or the job, the thing that they wanted to do, the project is over. They see themselves in the completion phase of they're already past it. They're already experiencing the emotion in many cases of having succeeded. And that knowing seems to play a role in what the result is. So there's a lot going on here that we're just in the infantile stages of trying to decipher and figure out. Now, one other thought that might be interesting in that regard is that something Giuliano Conforto, this astrophysicist we had in that film as well, talks about, and that's the idea that basically we're changing the way we spin. And like when we change our energy, we're changing the spin of the electrons in our actual brains and stuff. Like, the way she explains it's kind of hard for most people to understand, but that's the nutshell of it. And with the you could say the disintegration of the Earth's magnetosphere, well, she put out the thought that, well, if the magnetosphere is that giant repository of what I was just explaining, everything we've ever lived and experienced and put there, well, that seems to be fading and disappearing. That can mean two things. We're entering a lethal part of the universe and we're soon to be over as humans, or maybe it's time to ditch those collected thoughts because they're at a certain point, they limit us. And we throw that away and we start fresh.
Wouldn't that also be the collective resolution of karma? You could call it that, right?
Exactly. It disappears. And what happens then is what happens to the magnetosphere? Well, it's interesting. It goes back to the heart. The heart has its own magnetosphere. In fact, the heart can project a magnetosphere around it up to 4 meters. So maybe we become our own magnetosphere.
That's a beautiful, I think one of the most important answers of this conversation, Frank, what you just said about the feel, about everything. I encourage everyone to save this and kind of make a time mark. If you want to come back to this, something to ponder and meditate on. Last question of this Q&A Truth Marathon, which I love. It's by Krista Labella B. How can we speed up our frequency for the collective higher good? That's a great last question. Love it.
Well, we already tipped on a little bit of it, and that is in the terms of thoughts. when you monitor your thoughts, each thought has a specific frequency. If your thought is a negative thought that I can't do this, or I'm going to fail, or that person is such a jerk, or whatever, I can't do anything to change this. And you just, when you start monitoring where those thoughts come from, you realize that many of those thoughts are unconstructive. They're wasted. They're just thoughts that are pulling your energy down. And when you begin to do kind of a thought cleansing process, and you go through like a thought hygiene, you find that you can choose to maintain and keep thoughts in your head that are of a higher frequency, that are talking about things that you can do, or that you should try, or that you might encounter if you were to open yourself up to such and such. And you begin to form the fabric around a higher frequency timeline and a higher frequency, as a result, world. And so that's, I think, the way to do it, is just to begin to look at your thoughts a little closer, begin to question some of the structures, and taking a look at what is going on in the world a little bit more closely, and realizing that, wait a minute, if we just, if we sit there and think, oh, it's all going to be fine, let's just meditate, love is on its way. Well, maybe that isn't the answer. Maybe the answer is to do some of that, but also to look at some of that stuff going on. Going back to that quote I read earlier, if we don't look at it, they're just going to say, okay, well, nobody's caring. We're going to go ahead, and they're going to inch along in their agenda. And one day you're going to wake up and they're going to come to your house and say, well, you can no longer drive that car, or your bank account's frozen. You have to take over this. And if that happens, you can meditate all you want. You're going to be living as a slave within a slave system. So learning to improve the frequency and quality of your thoughts will change that frequency. It will change the probabilities of the negative timeline's manifestation, and increase the probability of the positive timeline's manifestation.
I think that was a beautiful answer. And it is the thing that we are multidimensional beings, or have more than just what meets the eye. We have this higher, bigger, greater self, and we need to be fully integrated beings. And part of that journey is also healing. So what you just said is also, when you begin healing your traumas, which we talk about so much, then your thoughts begin to clean up as well, because they don't just replay the same old movie of worries and doubts that is destructive thought versus the beautiful thoughts that you just shared. So we are on this healing journey collectively, and you've pointed at this so many times in our conversations, and we talk about this a lot. I think we're at this beautiful crossroads, and it's such an extremely exciting journey. Just this conversation today, in just a little under 2 hours, I mean, an expansion of thought, of spirit, of joy, of truth, and there is no darkness, no negativity around it. Although we touched on so many different subjects that could evoke that, but that was not our intention. Our intention was to have expansion. So Frank, I want to thank you so much, and I want to encourage everyone now, after this conversation, go click on that link. It's in the live chat. It's going to be under the video in a moment. It's in the description. Save 50% off Frank's new webinar, The Inner Looking Glass. If you pre-order it now, until July 1st, you save 50%. Use coupon code INSPIRED to know. And then the webinar is going to drop on July 14th, which means for those next few days, that's what you're going to do. You're going to be glued to the screen, going on a deep journey, a deep dive with Frank Jacob in The Inner Looking Glass. Frank, thank you so much for being here, for making this available to our audience. It's such an extraordinary reduced price. We really appreciate it. And it's just always wonderful to have these conversations. I so enjoyed this one. Thank you.
I enjoyed it myself, John. It was a great pleasure. Looking forward to doing it again.
Oh, we're going to do it again. We will. And I want to thank everyone in the audience, our beautiful Inspired Tribe, for being with us. We love you. We appreciate you. And we will be back with you again very, very soon.